They can figure that out. But section 3.5 is about solving by completing the square. Okay, so most people don't like to complete the square, but it's a fairly simple process. Okay, you just got to remember the formula for it, and that's why people don't like it a lot of times. So normally it looks like this: ax squared plus bx plus something. Okay, now the reason why we complete the square is because we're trying to factor a trinomial and it doesn't work. So we force it to work by completing the square. Okay, right now you understand why it's called completing the square, but what you're supposed to do, so notice numbers 2 through 7, they all kind of look like this, right? Where they have something squared plus something x plus a blank. And they say, find the value that completes the square and then rewrite it as a perfect square. So this is how it works. The thing that goes in here is b divided by 2 squared. Okay, that's what goes in that box. Okay, and then when they say, oh, now factor it, this is what it looks like when you factor it. So normally you're going to have, you might have some number, I'm not sure, but it could be a number x. I'm going to put plus or minus b over 2 squared. I know that second step looks kind of weird, and I can agree, it's a little weird. It's a lot easier when you actually see it in action. So right now we'll figure that out. Okay, but normally you get that answer by looking at the main terms. So I'll try to show you a little trick for it. Okay, so actually, if I can make it easier for you, I could just erase that number sign, and that might be easier for us. Okay, so that's the trick. When you complete the square, you get b divided by 2 and you square it. That's what you put in that underline. And then to factor it, just write x plus or minus whatever it happens to be. I'm not sure if it's a plus or minus. The way you can tell if it's a plus or minus is on this number right here, or that sign. If that symbol says plus, then you write plus on the factor. If that symbol says minus, you put minus. Okay? So that's going to kind of depend on this. So if you want, I'll kind of write this as plus or minus down here. That way you can see that's where it comes from. Okay? So let me show you an example. We'll do some of these from your homework. That way we can knock out some of them. So look at number 2. They give us a squared minus 24a plus something. So let's fill in that underline. Okay? So what you're supposed to do is get b divided by 2 and square it. What's my b value? Negative 24, or 24 should work as well, but negative 24 divided by 2 and square it. Well, negative 24 divided by 2, that's going to be negative 12. And if I square it, it's 144. So I'm going to write 144. So that's the number you're going to write in the underline. Then they say, okay, factor it. So to factor it, just do the following. Put parenthesis like this, squared. Notice the symbol right here is a minus. Let me put a minus in here. If you look, you're supposed to put your letter first. So what letter are we using? A's, right? So I'm going to put an A in the front. And then the number in the back is just your b value divided by 2. Right? So that would be a 12. Right? 24 divided by 2 is 12. And that's it. That's your completing of the square. Notice how it became something squared. That's why they call it completing the square. Okay? So this is your answer right here. And this is an answer right there. So that's how you do number 2. Okay, those are your 2 solutions. So let's look at, I don't know, let's look at number 4. We'll just go with the evens. So number 4, they give us y squared minus 14y plus something. So to figure out that something, that underline, I'm going to get b divided by 2 and square it. What's my b term? Negative 14. Remember, you could just use a 14. You don't have to put the negative because in the end we're going to square it, right? So it doesn't really matter. So I'm just going to, I'll put it though, negative 14 divided by 2 squared. That's negative 7 squared, which is 49. So I'm going to put 49 right there. So in the little blank, put a 49. Okay. Now they want us to factor it. So I'm going to factor it. I'm going to put a parenthesis here and here. I'm going to put a squared on the outside. Notice the symbol in the middle is a minus. Therefore, I put a minus there. The letters I'm working with are the letter Y. So I'm going to put a Y right here. And then I just got to take half of the middle number. So 14 divided by 2, 7. So I'm done. So there's one answer. There's the other answer. Not too hard, right? I hope not. Let's do number 6. Then I'm going to give you guys a little time to work on 3, 5, and 7 right now, and then we'll continue the lesson. I'm going to give you like 10 minutes, maybe like 5 to 7 minutes, let's say. But that way you can finish the front side. Well, I'm sorry, number 6. So number 6 says y squared plus 6y plus something. Okay? So to get the number that goes on the blank, I'm going to get b divided by 2 squared. My b value is a 6 divided by 2 squared. 6 divided by 2, that's 3 squared. And 3 squared is 9. So that 9 goes in the blank. Okay. Now to write my factor, I'm going to put a parenthesis, a square. What symbol do I put in the middle? A plus. Okay, I'm going to put a plus here because on the original equation there's a plus right there. Remember, that first symbol tells you what to put in the factor. It could be a plus or a minus, so you just got to pay attention to it. And the letter I'm dealing with is a y, so I'm going to put a y here. And then for the other space, the little empty space, I get b divided by 2, so that'd be a 3. And those are my answers. That and that. So do me a favor. I'm going to pause the recording here. Do questions 3, 5, and 7 really quick, okay? All right, so the golden rule. You probably heard this before. What you do to one side of an equation you must do to the other side. In other words, if you have an equation and you add 5 to the left side, then you have to add 5 to the right side because that's called balancing equations, okay? That's usually what they tell you, is to balance an equation. So this is balancing equations. It's just like when you guys have you ever seen those scales? I mean, I guess you could say the scales of justice. Like, they have like this little mechanism that looks like this, and on each side they have like these weights. right? And they're being held up. And then if you put a certain amount on one side, it starts to tip. So then you have to kind of put a little bit on the other side to keep it level, right? You try to balance it on scales. So that's the same idea with equations. You want to balance them. So if you add 5 here, you got to add 5 on the other side. If you subtract 10 here, you got to subtract 10 on this side, right? And we do that all the time whenever you're solving equations. You say, oh, I got to subtract 5, minus 5, right? So you guys have been doing this already. But the reason why I bring it back is because now when you look at the back of your worksheet, let's look at number 8. They want us to solve stuff. So let's take a look at this one. Now this is what's supposed to happen when you do this. You're supposed to try to factor this normally. So don't write down what I'm about to do, okay? But check it out. I'll tell you when I get back to writing. So my A and C and my B here, those are my numbers, right? 1, -10, -20. So if I multiply A times C, I get -20. My B is -10. Then you ask yourself, what two numbers multiply to 20 or -20 and add up to -10? Well, let's see. 20 has 1 and 20, 2 and 10, 4 and 5, and that's it. 20 of these pairs of numbers multiply to -20 but add up to -10. If you look carefully, 4 and 5 would only add up to 9. They would subtract to 1. 2 and 10 would add up to 12 but subtract to 8. 1 and 20 add up to 21 and subtract to 19. None of these give me a 10. Okay? That's when I know I'm in trouble, because I can't factor it. That's why they created completing the square, because it can't be factored. So completing the square kind of forces the factor to occur. So this is what you do. First thing, move that 20 to the other side. So leave it n squared minus 10n, and then notice what I'm about to do. Plus something equals 20 plus something. Okay, sometimes people ask me, why do you put a plus, not a minus? Look at every single one of the problems from 2 through 7. They always add the blank. They always add the blank. So that's what I'm doing. I'm adding the blank. Now, what number goes in that green blank? So we got to get B, which is -10, divided by 2. Where am I at now? So -10 divided by 2, -5. Square it. 25. So let's put that right there. 25. And notice I'm going to put it on the other side as well, because what I do to one side, I must do to the other. Now if you're wondering how the heck did I get that, I got -10 divided by 2 squared. That's -5 squared. So that's 25. That's how I got the 25. Okay? The left side, I can factor it using that little trick. So let me do that. Squared. There should be a minus in the middle, a letter N here, and then my B divided by 2 goes right there. So B is, well, my B value 10 divided by 2 would be 5. Okay, so that's how you factor the left side. On the right side, you're going to write 45. How do I get rid of a square? We talked about this yesterday. How do I get rid of a square power? If you guys don't have yesterday's homework, so you can cheat. We took square roots, remember? That's what we talked about yesterday, square roots. Square roots get rid of squares. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take a square root of both sides. Okay? that's going to cancel out. The square root and the power of 2 is going to cancel out. So all that's going to be left is an n minus 5. And I told you guys, whenever you take a square root of a number, what always has to be in front of the square root? You guys remember from yesterday? Can't be that long. Anytime you take what's the square root of 9? 3, but not just 3. It's plus or minus, right? Always two answers. Plus or minus square root of 45. All I'm going to do now is I'm going to move this negative 5 over. So it's going to look like this. I'm going to add 5 to both sides. So n equals 5 plus radical 45. Now your answer is correct, but it's not simplified. Okay, that's why we spent yesterday doing this, right? You can break down 45 into 9 times 5. And what's the square root of 9 we said? That was a 3, so plus or minus 3 radical 5. And that would be the answer they're looking for. Okay, so if I could kind of show you guys, remember, we add a blank to both sides. We figure out what goes into the blank. Once we do that, we factor it out. It usually has a power of 2. You take a square root of both sides to cancel the power of 2. Once you do that, don't forget to put plus or minus for your square root, because that always happens. Move your number over to the right. And if you can simplify the square root, do it. If you can't, then leave it alone. Okay? So if it said like square root of 10, then you can't do anything with that. So you leave it alone. Okay? But square root of 45, we can break that down. Now, on a test, if you guys leave it as square root of 45, I'm not going to mark you wrong. But just know that in state tests and stuff like that, they always simplify it. Okay? So make sure you know how to do that. All right? So let's try to do number... You get out of here at what time? 25? No. Yes. Let me do one more for you guys. I try to do as many as I can, but pick one. Oh, and don't do 15, by the way. You don't have to do 15. Pick one. Which one do you want me to do? 13? Did I hear that? 13? All right. 13, I'll do that one. 12 and 13 are about the same. So we'll go to 13. X squared plus 2x minus 13 equals 5. Now remember, we're not going to be able to factor this stuff, okay? That's the whole point of this lesson. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move 13 over by adding it. Okay? So I get x squared plus 2x equals 18. But remember, since we're completing the square, we want to put a blank right there. Right? So once we move that number over, put in blanks. What goes in that blank? Think about it. We got to get b divided by 2 and square it. So that's 1 squared. So it's just a 1. So I'll put a 1 here and a 1 there. To factor it, something squared equals 19. Okay, 18 plus 1 is 19. To factor it, I'm going to put a plus or minus on the inside. A plus, right? Because that's what's right here. There's a plus sign right there. The letter X. And then I'm supposed to take B and divide it by 2 to figure out the number. So 2 divided by 2 is 1. I got to solve for X. Since I have a power of 2, what do I do to both sides? Square root, right? Get rid of it by taking a square root. The square root cancels the square. So we get x plus 1 equal to plus or minus square root of 19. Can I break square root of 19 down? No, it's a prime number. You can't do anything with it. So that's done. Get that positive 1, move it over by subtracting it to both sides. So you get x equals negative 1 plus or minus the square root of 19. And I'll stop there for you guys.